Roy Moore. I'm not defending Roy Moore. I'm defending due process. I like to believe that if you were ever accused of something you believe, you know that you did not do, that you would. The people that are accusing you, or you would believe that people would treat you the same way you would want to be treated if you were in that case, which is give you the benefit of the doubt. Look at your proven history. Look at the people that are surrounding you who also have proven history of doing good and doing well and for the good of the people. And so that's really all we have to go on. I really like to believe that this will be played out not in the public's media, but be voted by the people of Alabama.
Well, I'm quite sure I'll never be accused of preying on teenage girls. Have you ever known anybody who's been accused by 9 different people of preying on teenage girls and who's been banned from the shopping mall because of a history of predatory behavior? That sounds like pretty compelling evidence. It's not as if this is ever going to go to court. It was 40 years ago. Do you know anyone who's ever been accused by 9 different people of preying on teenage girls sexually?
Let me just answer that if I can briefly. Well, first of all, it is proven that the Galveston mall manager said that this story of him being banned from the mall is a false
I've never
story.
seen any evidence of that.
As though it is 100% proved.
Okay, so have you ever heard of anyone that's been? Have you ever heard of anyone being accused by 9 women?
Well, Joy, let me say this:
you preying on them when they were teenagers.
You don't have to be accused of sexual immorality. You can be accused of anything.
No. Let's stay with sexual immorality. Have you ever heard, do you know of any other man that you've ever dealt with who's been accused by 9 different people, or by any number of people, of preying on them when they were teenage girls? Do you know anybody in that circumstance? You make it sound as if this is something that happens all the time.
Well, I personally never known anybody that has been accused of sexual immorality. But the thing that I'm saying is we need to also understand, we need to be wise with due process. I mean,
what due process
in an ideal world, we would want all of our candidates to be morality, but morality is not the only qualification for leadership.
Oh, it's not.
The fact of the matter is we're discovering that throughout the history of the Bible, or throughout the scriptures, we discover God have used so many immoral people. We love the Psalms of David, but yet we also know that the same person who wrote those Psalms of David was also a murderer. He was an adulterer. He too had issues. He was a liar. I mean, we can go on and on throughout the scriptures. Jesus was the only perfect man that ever walked the earth, but yet we're now discovering, even Dr. Martin Luther King, whom we loved and beloved, discovered that there could have been some possible infidelity that
took place, even
though he was slandering. That did not disqualify him from leading us to the promised land. And so I'm not saying that
did you just hear that,
is guilty or innocent. I'm only simply saying let us listen to the facts.
Let me ask you a question. Hold on a second. We have 3 other guests, and I want to let them in. And I'm gonna just one more question for you, and then I'm gonna come to Pastor A.R. Bernard. As a pastor, do you counsel your parishioners that morality is not a necessary ingredient for leadership? Is that what you preach in your church?
No, see.
Because you just said it doesn't matter.
You're just taking what I said out of context, because I did not say morality isn't important. I did not say that. I very clearly said
but immorality is not disqualifying for leadership in your view.
Because if that was the case, all of us would be disqualified. I would be disqualified.
I don't think all of us have been accused of sexually molesting children.
Dr. A.R.
Let me go to this full church.
Because the Bible says we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I have been an immoral man. Even after I was saved, I have fallen by the wayside. But by the grace of Jesus, I'm still here.
Let me go to Pastor A.R. Bernard and get your response to the theology just expressed by Pastor.
I'm a little surprised. It is true that the Bible is filled with leaders who had flaws, but to say that morality doesn't hold as part of the standard by which we judge someone that we're going to give power to is an expression of the crisis that we're in as a nation.
Word.
The thing that separates the situation with Judge Moore from everything else, or this candidate Moore from everything else, is that what's being exposed are immoral social norms that have been neglected and ignored and have been responsible for the exploitation of women for a long time in our culture. It's being uncovered. And to say that we're downgrading our values and lowering our standards so that we turn a blind eye to these things, that's a problem that has to be addressed in our society.
Yeah, and Frank Schaeffer, I want to go to you on this. So first of all, before I come to you, I want to play Alan Keyes, who is one of the people who showed up to support Roy Moore and get very angry with the media for bringing this up at all. This is what Alan Keyes had to say to reporters after the event, and I believe this was women supporting Roy Moore was the event, and here's Alan Keyes afterwards.
Asked and answered again and again. He could answer that question 1,000 times. And if 1,000 accusations were made, he could answer every one 1,000 times. And you would prove yourself a liar.
Frank Schaeffer, you know, there were a lot of very angry supporters of Roy Moore there, essentially accusing the media of attacking Roy Moore and saying that it's all lies. All of these women are lying. They're all just liars and being used by Moore's opponents. I think a lot of Americans are looking at what's happening in Alabama with consternation. Can you make sense of it, of what's going on down there?
Well, let me broaden the framework a little bit. You know, I grew up in an evangelical home. My father, Francis Schaeffer, became an international evangelical leader. And I remember being with Dad one time when Billy Graham was sitting down having tea with him, telling Dad, I will never, ever endorse a candidate again because I'm so shocked at what Nixon told me about his anti-Semitism and profanity that he's been caught with on tapes. He was crying, he was confessing, he was asking me to pray for him. I listened to the tapes and I told him, why did I ever support you? Now that's Billy Graham with Nixon. Fast forward to our own era. Franklin Graham defending Donald Trump, grabbing women by the crotch and saying, well, we all sin. And I just want to tell you something. In my short lifetime of 65 years, and I'm long out of the evangelical movement, and I talk about that journey in the book Letter to Lucy, that said, you know, if my dad and the old-time evangelicals came back, or even if you snapshot of Billy Graham back in the day, I knew him personally. He used to come to our house and stay. His daughter Gigi and I just had breakfast down in North Carolina a few months ago. He was shocked at Nixon's profanity and wondered why he had supported him. Look at Franklin Graham, look at Jerry Falwell Jr., look at Ralph Reed, the movers and shakers of the politicizing of evangelicalism. Let me tell you what's happened in my lifetime. Evangelical white American Christianity is now a relativistic religion. My dad always used to rail against relativistic situational ethics. That was always the talk back when I was a kid and he was holding forth on these issues. Who is now the propagator of situational ethics? A guest on your show 1 second ago saying moral rectitude is not a qualification that's necessary for leadership. And let me just say one other thing. There's a huge difference between the Psalms of David. I just want to stick up for good old King David. When he wrote them all in penitent confession in tears for his sins, asking God to forgive him, not only admitting what he had done, but spending a lifetime of poetry writing about the horror that he looked back on his own failings with. That's a far cry from Donald Trump, who said he would sue any woman who said he had done anything, denied everything, or Roy Moore's supporter, even worse, calling God as their kind of witness to his innocence up against 9 living flesh and blood women. The evangelicals are expert at discounting women's points of views anyway.
Yeah.
And if you look at the literal interpretation of the Bible of St. Paul telling you, and this is not a paraphrase, it's literal, women should sit down and shut up in church and not be heard from. And not just church, any situation, and be in obedience to your husband. That is the context in which these good women of Alabama are standing up, supporting not just Roy Moore, but an entire sociological system which discounts women's witness as if they're just half citizens, sort of like the way South Africa did, that I lived in for a year during the apartheid era, where you could have 20 black witnesses talking about a cop taking someone out and beating them to death. None of it counted because they weren't full human beings. Yeah. Evangelicals treat women that way, discount what they say, and now are preaching moral relativism. I just want that to sink into the audience. Moral relativism being preached from evangelicals. How the world is now upside down.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount the voice of the woman that we have on our panel. We do have an evangelical Christian woman here, Sarah Rumpf. You know, how do you explain, because there are women also standing there supporting Roy Moore, including the governor of Alabama. How do you explain that to people who may be looking at it and going, what is going on here?
Well, while I am very opposed to Roy Moore, if I were an Alabama voter, I wouldn't be voting for him. Let me say that from the outset. But I am sympathetic to some degree of the situation that these Christian voters find themselves in. Because in the situation from a conservative Christian perspective, there has been a lot of years and years of media bias. And look, there's media bias on both sides. And that makes it easy to discount news you don't like. And the media on both sides plays up on that. I mean, I see all the channels pick on each other and the different slants that people take. But what we have now is Roy Moore's defenders are attempting to make a lot of noise around the edges of this story and trying to draw attention away from the heart of it. The heart of it is that Roy Moore admits knowing a number of these women. He admits that he dated teenage girls. One of the prosecutors, a woman who worked with him during this time, has said on the record that he was known to date teenage girls. His denials of what has gone on are confusing and contradictory. And as far as due process and innocent until proven guilty, those are constitutional standards that we apply in courts of law when the government is trying to deny you life, liberty, or your property. And that's not what we do when we're voting. The voters of Alabama are intelligent people. What I beg people to do is look at what Roy Moore himself has said and what he himself has admitted, what people have said on the record, and you use your own judgment. Who is credible? These women are getting death threats and harassment. There is no benefit there's no real good benefit from coming forward and getting all of this heat on you and all of this pressure unless you feel morally compelled to tell the truth.
Yeah, indeed. I'm going to keep the whole panel. Well, everybody's sticking around. Give me a second, Pastor. We're going to take a break. Yeah, when we come back, we'll let everybody else back in. My panel's sticking around. We have much more of this conversation after a quick break. Stay with us.
The issues about our country. You were not asked to ask personal questions about Mr. Moore. We wanted to hear what he had to say about the issues, and you did not allow it because you are the fake, lying news from the swamp.
That was the scene Thursday when Roy Moore defenders confronted members of the media after an event where evangelical conservatives stood in support of Moore. Pastor A.R. Bernard, Frank Schaeffer, Sarah Rumpf, and Pastor Mark Burns are back with me. And Pastor Bernard, you wanted to pick up on a point that Sarah Rumpf did.
Yeah, what she said about women are now coming forth, it's more than just that this is the climate for it. History is not written by the victims, it's written by the victors. History is written by those in power. But during the course of time, when those who have been oppressed within that history emerge to positions of power, like women, they begin to reevaluate the narrative. And that's what's happening. 40 years ago, women couldn't say a thing. It was a social norm in that culture to keep quiet and just turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
But here it is, 30, 40 years later, women are empowered, they're in positions of strength, and now they're coming out and saying, we cannot allow this to continue.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that we even have a conversation about the role of morality in leadership. How can we, me as a pastor, even take on the notion that I can be in a position of leadership and have my people look to me, respect me as a moral leader in a religious context when I put that aside and say, well, it's okay, I can do what I want.
Pastor Burns, how do you answer that?
Well, I wanted to just be clear, as I stated in the last segment. I did not say that morality was not important. What I said was it wasn't the only quality. Leadership and faith goes along, as my good friend Pastor Jeffrey said, it goes along with being a good leader.
But hold on a second. Can I just one moment? Hold on. I'm going to let you back in. But here's the thing. You're not a lawyer. You're not a judge. You're not here to judge whether or not in a court of law Roy Moore would be found guilty after 9 women accused him of sexually molesting their children. You're a moral leader. We have you on because you're a pastor. What your job job is, in theory, is to provide a moral framework for the people who go to your church and who listen to you.
Preaching.
How can you say that in your moral framework, you're not here to judge, to adjudicate the case, but that you're saying that morality is not the only important thing? Aren't you a moral leader? Like, isn't that what you're supposed to be advocating for moral leadership?
Joy, if an accuser came to me and I've had them come and I've prayed with them and I've ministered to them and I've counseled them,
but would you want them to lead your state or your country?
Would be the first step. My first obligation is to lead my family. That's my first focus, is to lead Mark Burns' family. Secondly, it is to lead the Burns family. Secondly, to lead my church, my congregation. And then I say this again across the board. As a pastor, as a leader, my first goal, if an accuser came to me and to be ministered and to be counseled, is to first, discover what do we need to do to start the healing process within that
individual.
Bullshit. Asking for redemption or healing. He's just denying he did it.
We're not talking about Roy Moore right now.
Yes, we are. That's what they're
bullshit.
We're talking about the accused because it's all connected. The fact of the matter is, we need to be asking ourselves, Joy, between Roy Moore and the accusers, who is more credible? A person that has had years of experience, years of walking upright
You don't
publicly,
find these women
and
credible?
You don't find them credible? These new 9 women. I'm only simply saying you have to begin to ask yourself, this is very suspicious. Joy, let me finish, please. I love you so much. But you got to let me finish. You got to let me finish my statement because I can't talk over you. This is your show. But I can't. But as long as you're talking, I can't answer.
Let me just ask you this question: do you find these women less credible than Roy Moore? Very simple.
I do find the fact that Roy Moore has served faithfully for over 40 years publicly in public office, and these women had plenty of opportunities, Joy, to come out. Wow. And it's suspicious when you got. And I think the great people of Alabama are realizing that, which is why the majority of Alabamians are still going to vote for Roy Moore. Even the governor is still going to vote for Roy Moore. Even the women that stepped up and said we're still supporting Roy Moore because they're understanding it is extremely suspicious that this is all coming out after he's become the candidate.
Sarah Rose, we have a woman on this panel. I want to let Sarah answer. Hold on, you can't filibuster the whole segment. Sarah, you just heard a Pastor Mark Burns, say that these women, because they're new, because no one's ever heard of them, because obviously they're not famous, and they haven't been, Roy Moore's been in public life for a very long time, including when he was a prosecutor calling the high school to get a girl out of trig class that he wanted to date. But he's saying that they're not credible.
But you say it like it's fact, Joy. That's the problem.
Hey, it's not your turn. Give me a chance here.
Go, Sarah.
First of all, these women did not come forward.
That's all I'm saying.
These women did not come forward. Okay, this is a fact. These women did not come forward. The Washington Post reporters were in town after Roy Moore won the primary because it was a newsworthy special election in the Trump era. What's going to happen? That is legitimate for them to be there. They heard the rumors. They started asking people. They asked more people. They asked more people. And that eventually led them to people who knew women who had dated Roy Moore. They talked to these women. The women all said they were reluctant to come forward at first, and then when there were multiple stories, they were willing to tell their stories on the record. That is why the story came out now. These women were not plotting or waiting. There's no conspiracy here. The women and the reporters' stories are all on the record. It all matches up. Second of all, the idea that we're going to discredit these women because they don't have the prominence of Roy Moore. That is how Roy Moore and Harvey Weinstein and Bill O'Reilly and all the rest of these predators have been able to get away from it for so long, because they were in a position of power and the women were afraid of social and professional and cultural consequences. Mm-hmm. So, and if you look at every single one of these stories, Roy Moore is going after girls who are more vulnerable. A lot of them were from broken homes, because let me tell you what, if some 30-year-old man had come around me when I was a teenager, it would not have gone well in his interactions with my father. So,
I want to play another group of women who also are not prominent. Many of them weren't unknown. Some were on The Apprentice, some not. Who also felt empowered to come forward after they heard other women telling their stories. And these are the accusers of Donald Trump. Let's play a bit of them.
It was at that time where he turned to me and embraced me and gave me a kiss on the lips.
When we entered the room, he grabbed each of us tightly in a hug and kissed each one of us without asking permission.
He then grabbed my shoulder and began kissing me again very aggressively and placed his hand on my breast.
He pushed me up against the wall and had his hands all over me and tried to get up my dress again. The person on my right, who unbeknownst to me at that time was Donald Trump, put their hands up my skirt. He did touch my vagina through my underwear. Absolutely.
You know, Frank Schaefer, you know, when there are this many women who don't know each other coming forward and accusing a man of sexual misconduct, one would think that just the volume of them gives credibility to each. They're being empowered by each other to come forward. Have you ever heard or known of a man who's had multiple accusers come forward and accuse them of sexual misconduct and they be completely innocent of it? Does it make sense to you?
One thing I've never, not at all. And one thing I've never heard of is a man accused by these many credible people that white evangelical Christians, 83% of them, then march out and vote for because they have traded a lust for power and revenge on what they regard as a liberal elite for the least vestige of moral principle. Listen, I'm a man, I'm 65, I lived in the 70s, I was a movie director of crappy movies in Hollywood for 4 years, I made 4 films, I lived in the movie business and so forth. I have not lived a sheltered life after I left the evangelical world, and even in Hollywood, when someone comes forward, like Harvey Weinstein or whatever, who makes excuses saying, well, those were the days and that's how it was. Look, I went to a boys' school. Those were not the days. Jerks, creeps behave like this. We have a creep for a president. And one thing that I think we just need to make very clear, what a sad day that we're sitting here on television talking together about a time of history when spiritual revival and any real sense of spirituality, decency, and goodness is so far away. We are parsing the details, comparing a president who is sitting in office right now in the Oval Office, not even to mention the Russia connection, the fact that his family is a family of scam artists with basically accusations coming out the kazoo of everything from money laundering to handing the Chinese sweetheart deals because you're related to the president. Forget all that. We're sitting here talking with a couple of pastors and the son of an evangelical leader about who put whose hand up some woman's skirt on an airplane, who fondled a teenager. Look, I get up every day and I care for 3 grandchildren of mine, ages 9, 7, and 3. They are my heart, all right? I am trying to send them into a world that is so bankrupt in our country now of spiritual value and morality that I despair. That's the real essence of where we are today. Despair at what's happening.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, I am out of time. I wish I had more time. Thank you to Pastor A.R. Bernard, Frank Schaefer, Sarah Rump, Pastor Mark Burns. Thank you all. Really appreciate you guys coming. And coming up, much more on the politics of the Alabama Senate race.